Our distinguished speaker this evening is John Bird, founder and editor-in-chief of The Big Issue. John, and these are almost John's own words, I think, was born into poverty, brought up in care, and has a life that's as rich a tapestry of human experience as any interested audience might care to find. His journey has included spells as a prison inmate, an artist, and a poet. He has walked the walk, and now he's an established iconoclast, activist, and publisher with The Big Issue as the world's most successful street magazine. John has been described, and I quote, as an inspirational business leader with an outstanding record of using business as a tool of social change. John is an original and authoritative voice on a range of social and business issues. At a time when corporate responsibility is preoccupying business leaders and consumers alike, John offers a fresh approach with original perspectives on the interaction of business and society. Speaking about himself, a subject that John's familiar with, John says, "I speak very clearly and powerfully, and my message is simple. It's about motivation, leadership, drive, learning from your mistakes, and turning rejection into something positive. I've been homeless, an offender, and an addict, yet I've achieved more than many who started life with more advantages than me. I'm now ready to help people realize their goals." John, can I extend a very warm welcome to you here today and ask you to speak powerfully and simply to us now.
Yeah, last night I was at the Cambridge Union. I live in Cambridge, and I don't really have an awful lot to do with Cambridge other than live there and have my very young children at school there, because even though I'm the oldest father in the playground, I am also a former young father and have the children to prove it. I don't get involved in the university too much because I'm all over the place. I spend a lot of time on the road. I spend a lot of time going around talking to groups of people about something very dumb and very straightforward, and that is about not taking people on half journeys. The world is full of legislation. It's full of organizations. It's full of systems that take people on half a journey. When any one of you or one of your children goes to school and begins the process maybe at the age of about 14 to become ready for the university, they have to go through their various levels. They have to do their various courses, and at the end of maybe 4 years, 5 years, they are then ready. So at some stage you start the journey that ends when you get to the university, and then you go to the university and you begin another journey, and that ends with a bit of luck with you getting a job, and then you go on a life journey, and the life journey ends up with you retiring relatively stable, relatively prosperous, and your children, you take them on a journey. Now, all these journeys are wonderful, except the fact that we have institutionalized the half journey. And I want to talk about this before we talk about the subject at hand, largely because I'm trying to introduce myself as not just another proprietor, as not just another media mogul, but somebody who is involved in everything to do with social change. The half journeys, I'll just give you an example. In London, when I started The Big Issue in 1991, 20 years ago, there were 501 homeless organisations in London alone. These organisations were there to help the homeless out of the street, help feed them, help give them a place to stay, give them a bit of comfort, give them a bit of love, give them some clothes, give them a place to watch television. And these were largely, in 1991, supported by the public by charitable trusts. They weren't supported by the government. Then the government got involved, and over the last 20 years, they have put an enormous amount of energy and money into supporting homeless organisations who, unfortunately, only take people on half a journey. And the half a journey they take them on is they clean them up, get them out of the streets, get them into an orphanage, into a hostel, and then maybe get them a couple of years later into social housing, where they then stew, where they're then indoor homeless as opposed to outdoor homeless. And that's what I mean about a half journey. When I was a young boy, we tended to believe in full journeys. So, for instance, when I went into a detention centre to do a short, sharp shock, there was a beginning and a middle and an end to it. Didn't always end the way that they wanted. Or when I went into a reformatory, what they did was they educated you and trained you, and they did all sorts of things so that when you came out, you were in a position to be useful in society, and you weren't parked up. Here comes my youngest daughter. Hello, darling. Come and sit in. I was worried. Here we are. Sorry. Sorry, I'm perfectly formed. I'm a perfectly formed 66-year-old man, as you can see. The only thing wearing out is that thing there. And I'm going to give it to some scientific department at some stage because I want everybody to talk loud, especially people who want to bring about social change. I've had too many people come into my office and say, oh, yeah, I really do want to help the poor. And I say, speak up then. Anyway. So so in the old days, you went into prison and you went in bad and you came out better. And you went through a complete journey. And I was very fortunate. I learned to read and write. I learned to be a plumber, or learning about plumbing. I learned about bricklaying. I learned about printing. And all these things have been useful to me later on in life. What we've got now with the prison service, for instance, is we've got a really weird world where we take our young off the streets. It's nearly always our young. It's nearly always people who come from a social security background, because they tend to be the only people who've got the time to do wrong. And they then move them into the prison system, where they keep them in this half-journey situation and let them out, and often they go in bad and they come out worse. That's what I mean. We have this really weird world where we give people social security, but we don't give them the means of getting off social security. So when I meet a young Muslim woman in the West End of London crying to me because she has lost her husband, has got 2 children, and she wants to go to the university so that she can become a student, so that she can then maybe get a job where she can bring her 2 children up and they don't slip into the abyss of long-term unemployment. She's not allowed to complete the next stage because she's on social security. So it's a series of half journeys. And that is one of the greatest crimes of modern life, that you are wasting your money, and it happens in Scotland, and maybe Scotland's going to do something different because it's going to listen to people like me. You are going to waste your money, your social security money, your social intervention money, on keeping people in these in this kind of half journey. So I want you to know that, I'm not just another overweight businessman and proprietor. I started the big issue. In fact, I owe it to Scotland, you'll be pleased to know, because when I was 21, I was on the run from the old Bill, sleeping rough in Edinburgh, and doing all sorts of ne'er-do-wells. I used to make my money by smashing the windows of expensive, of these little antique shops they used to have in Edinburgh. And the thing is that I'm not having a go at the Scottish, but Scottish antique dealers were not very good on alarms. They didn't really want to spend too much money on security. So you'd throw the brick through the window and you wouldn't hear a... the brick would go through and you could just leisurely help yourself and then go away and flog it. So, but I'm sure that's all different now because you've got so much security. But that's how I met a particular big-nosed Scotsman called Gordon Roddick. I met him in a pub called Paddy's Bar, which is now the Saltire in Rose Street. I was in Scotland because my first wife was Scottish. I'd met a young girl in a lift, a young Scottish girl in a lift when she was 17. I met her in a lift, made her pregnant, not in the lift. We became, because I was a devout ex-Catholic, I married her and we got, had a child and all that stuff. And I ended up in Scotland and then it all fell to pieces because I was thieving and doing all sorts of things wrong. And she threw me out. And then I met Gordon Roddick. And Gordon Roddick was a person who had a great interest in ne'er-do-wells like me. And we remained mates for a year or two, and then I didn't see him for 20 years. And then 20 years later, I was watching the television with my son because I'd moved on to another family, and now I'm on to another family. And lo and behold, there was this big-nosed Scotsman. The nose looked even bigger because he'd shaved off his beard. And I knew what that beard was for. Anyway, we used to compare noses because we both had big noses. And he had become a multi-millionaire. He had become a very, very rich man. And this very rich man, with his wife Anita, had started the body shop. And that's where the money comes from for the big issue. If I had not been in Scotland hiding from the police, and also if I had not met that young girl in the lift, I've tried to send her hundreds of thousands of pounds. She keeps returning it to me because she's very principled. Don't believe me, she doesn't. But she is the answer. She was the reason, and he was the reason why I ended up in Scotland and starting the big issue. The big issue is the most phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal invention that's probably ever been invented in and around publishing. Unfortunately, it has yet to reach its full peak. It has yet to reach its full value because there are so many problems going on in society. We have one of the major problems with society, as well as the half a journey, is the fact that we spend so much of our money, so much of our charity money, that in itself is not used to get people out of the sticky stuff, but maintains them there. For most of the charities that I know in homelessness, I would pick a dozen of them who get people out of the sticky stuff and move them on, give them an exit strategy out of poverty, but very rarely do they do that. And most of them, largely because they don't have the finance, largely because they don't have the skills and the ability, really kind of make the poor comfortable where they are. And that's a great offence to most homeless organisations, because homeless organisations don't want to hear that actually what they're doing is they are just making the poor comfortable. The big issue was invented because in 1990, Gordon Roddick went to the United States, to Manhattan in New York, and a very large black guy was walking towards him, and Gordon thought that the guy was going to rob him, but in fact the guy wasn't going to rob him, and said, "Excuse me, buddy, would you like to buy a copy of my street paper?" And Gordon said, "Yeah, how much is it?" And he says, "It's $1." He said, "All right." And so he bought it, and he said, "So how does it work?" He says, "Well, I buy it for 50 cents and I sell it for $1, so I make 100% on I make a markup. I'm a tradesman." And Gordon says, "So why are you doing this?" And he says, "Well, I'm a 54-year-old black guy. I've just come out of the penitentiary. I've been in the penitentiary on and off for most of my life. If I get nicked again, they'll throw the keys away and I'll never be out. I'll never see civilian life again. So I left the prison, didn't go back to Brownsville where I came from, went to Queens, tried to get a job, big black guy just out of prison who's going to give him a job, became homeless, Then met this organisation called Street News who was selling a street paper. And I thought, great, I'll sell it. And this guy had kept himself out of the grief for about 9 months by the time that Gordon spoke to him. Interesting. Here was a person who, to panhandle in America, you get picked on and you get moved on. To steal in order to maintain your life, you're likely to get nicked also. So what was the alternative? Nobody was giving this guy a job, and nobody was giving a lot of people out of the prison a job. So Street News came along and gave him a job. And he managed to pay for his rooming house. And he said he even sent some of the money that he had left over to send to his daughter, because he had a very young daughter. And Gordon thought, wow, this is fantastic. He came back to the United Kingdom, and he got the Body Shop Foundation to do a feasibility study. And the feasibility study went and spoke to virtually all of the homeless organizations, and nearly all of the homeless organizations said it would be very wrong to start a street paper where homeless people earned money. And they said, why is that? And they said, well, homeless people are very, very disturbed people. They are mentally disturbed, they are physically disturbed, they are undernourished, they've got all sorts of problems, and earning a bit of money is not going to change them. In fact, it's going to add to their ability to do the kind of stuff that you do when you've got a bit of money and you've got a habit formed, either bringing you to the streets or you get it when you're on the streets. There's a big argument. Most of the people you meet on the streets who have a drink and a drug problem, they got that while they're on the streets because it's a coping mechanism. Anyway, so the homeless organizations, 501 of them, with the exception of maybe one or two, said forget about it. Gordon was a bit despondent about that. And in early 1991, he said to me, because we'd become mates again, as I keep saying, when you meet people with money, stick to them. You've got to have your principles. And I've always been a very principled sort of geezer. And he was desperate to give me some money to start a street paper. And I said, Gordon, I'll go and do a feasibility study. I said, I'll charge you £200 a day. He said, I'll give you 100. I said, great, so I'll do it. I'd have done it for 15 quid. I was so broke. And I said, but if this it'll have to be started as a business. I don't want anything to do with a charity. I abhor charities. I hate do-gooders. Anyway, sorry, that's terrible. I should tell a joke now. But I don't know how rude the joke should be, because... Can I tell you a joke my brother told me? My daughter's in the audience, so I can't tell the joke I always... Well, I will tell the joke I always tell, but she says, Dad, are you going to tell... She's only 5. She said, Dad, are you going to tell that joke about the man who rushes into a shop and he says to the shopkeeper, where's your camouflage jackets? And then the shopkeeper says, they're good, aren't they? So she says to me, Dad, are you going to tell that one? I told that to Ken Dodd. I got that joke from Ken Dodd, and I gave Ken Dodd a joke, which was what was it? Did you know they're doing a Liverpool version of Silence of the Lambs? And Ken Dodd went, yeah. And he said, what is it? And I said, shut up, yous. He said, my one's better than yours. No, the joke I was going to tell you, my brother went to a safari park recently, and he saw 2 lions right out in the middle of 2 male lions, right out in the middle of the grass, doing naughty things to each other. He said it was terrible. He said they had no pride. Don't know how that goes down. As I say, I'm a devout ex-Catholic, so I can get away with it. In fact, I'm such a good devout ex-Catholic that whenever I make my girlfriends pregnant, I always marry them. And that doesn't go down very well in Ireland. I tried that out recently, and that was very... Anyway, so where was I? Oh, yeah. So I said to Gordon, It has to be a business, can't be a charity. And the other thing is the homeless will have to pay for the paper. No gifts. And he said, well, you've been homeless. You've run, the other thing is, in between getting out of the sticky stuff in my 30s and becoming a middle-class git from the South, I had started a print company because I'd learnt to print when I was in Nick, and it was a wonderful series of skills I got, and I became a very good printer, started magazines for all sorts of people, did work for people at Oxford University Press and all those sorts of things, and became quite good at it and started magazines for people like the Tate Gallery, the Royal Academy and all that stuff. So I was there. And Gordon said, well, I'd like you to start it because you've been homeless, you're an ex-offender, you're an ex-druggie, you're not a very nice person, you have no sentimental attachment to the poor. You know, they don't ring your bell. And you know about printing and design and all that. So anyway, I went and did my feasibility study. I didn't go to the homeless organisations. I went to the police. And I said to the police that what I'm going to do is start a street paper, and this street paper is going to be sold by homeless people and people who are begging in the streets at the moment. And the police were euphoric. This was at Scotland Yard, and I'll always remember the big copper who had a Mancunian accent. He said, are you going to get these people out of the street by giving them a job and making honest money rather than begging and shoplifting and mugging people? And he said it in such a way, I thought, yes. He said, well, bloody good luck. He said, that's bloody marvellous. He said, that's revolutionary. Gave me a big hit on the back, and off I was. I thought, they're right. If I look upon this as a crime reduction program, it's great, which is what we've tried to be doing ever since. Then I went to the homeless, and I said to the homeless, I'm thinking of starting a street paper. What do you think about that? And they said, with some exceptions, like I should leave very quickly, with, a few added verbiages. Or some of them said, enough of them said, anything's better than begging. And I know anything's better than begging. When I used to begging is a mind destruction mechanism. When you beg, you hate the people who don't give you any money, and you loathe the people who give you money. Work that one out. It really does screw your mind. And no one's ever been got off the streets by a handout. Anyway, so it was very, very interesting, and I went to Gordon. I gave him a feasibility study that he wanted, and he said, well, get on with it. I'll support it. And so the Body Shop gave me the money to start a street paper. Have I upset you?
No, I have to go. I really would like to stay, but I have to go and get my son.
Yeah, all right. Well, you can get a recording of it, I'm not charging. No, sometimes people walk out. I'm trying to be nice to people. Anyway, so I had all the players in line, but the one thing I had neglected was what was the contents going to be? What was the magazine going to be about? And then I ran into a major problem, because even though I'd started life as a Catholic boy, London Irish Catholic in the slums of Notting Hill, as you know now, it's a very expensive slum, but it used to be a very poor slum. Anybody could live there, but now you have to be chosen. You have at least £10 million to be putting away. And I moved from that, and I moved into a homeless, was an orphan, brought up by the Sisters of Charity, and then out in the streets, shoplifting, housebreaking, stealing cars, beating up teachers. Unfortunately, always avoiding the PE teachers because they could do it better than you. And getting into a lot of trouble. And then being a racist, was taught to hate blacks and Jews and Scots people because my mum was Irish. And then I got out of that by becoming a Marxist, Leninist, Engelist, Trotskyist when I ran away to Paris to hide from the police. You've got to find places to hide. And then when I got out of all my racism and all my chauvinism, then realized that the world was real and I should get myself educated, which I did. And I'd gone through all of these things, and I'd moved from extreme right-wing, underclass thinking into extreme left-wing and protests and all sorts of things like that. And I found when I went to recruit journalists, I only got one kind of journalist. And that was the kind of journalists that defined themselves by their absolute distaste and dislike for others. They define themselves by the failure of others. They define themselves by the failure of capitalism. Now, that's great if you have a paper and you want to fill it full of people who say, those capitalist rogues, etc., etc. But when you're trying to sell a paper to a city gent who may read the Financial Times, and your range goes from a city gent to a squatter, you're going very broad because you're trying to produce a popular publication, then people who are left of the Labour Party are quite useful. Let's not rule them out. But you can't just run a paper on that basis that is supposedly a popular paper. And one of the things that I've struggled with over the years is, and having been through the Marxist, Leninist, left wing, right wing, all that sort of thing, I wanted to produce a paper that was more and more about what was really happening, and that you didn't necessarily have to define people by define the world by the failures of others. I'll give you an example. There was an article in the Big Issue one time, which was, I'm not slagging off the Big Issue, even though, I'm the proprietor. I'm the proprietor. It's a business. I'm the shareholder. This isn't a charity. My customers are the readers, not the homeless. I work with the homeless to supply the readers. We're in the marketplace. We didn't start as a charity, as I said. But one time there was an article in the Big Issue which said that the Minister of Housing in the government, this was the Labour government, Mr. Blair's government, had refused to comment on something to do with hostile issues around, homelessness. And I looked at this story just by accident, and it had already been published the week before, and I said, how did you get this story? And the person said, oh, well, what happened was this incident happened on a on a Thursday morning, and it was hot news because these things were happening in hostels. So we rang up the Department of Housing, the homeless czar, and asked for an opinion, and we rang them at about 12 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock, they hadn't got back to us. And by 2 o'clock, we had to close the press because we were being printed that night. So I said, oh, so you gave them 2 hours, didn't tell them it was coming, and you put refused. I mean, that's stretching the imagination a bit. Now, I'm not here to defend the government, but what I am here to do is to try and define the world on the basis of check it out. Oh, God. That'll be it's the old Coke's photo. It's my wife, sorry. Hello, darling. I'm doing that talk that I came all the way to Inverness to do. You remember that I left early this morning? Yeah. And I won't be back till tomorrow? I'm doing the talk at this very moment. I'm on the stage. Oh, sorry. Do you want to send them a message? What have you got to say? It's all right, darling. I've got to go now. Okay, bye. Bye. Sorry. I was doing a talk for the Canine Defence League, and it was going nowhere because I don't know an awful lot about dogs. And the phone rang from this girlfriend of mine, and we had a little discussion on the stage, and then everybody fell in with me. Anyway, I'm here. I mean, to me, the first thing is check it out before you pass it on. Check it out before you pass it on. If you talk to a big issue vendor, and the big issue vendor will tell you, as he will sometime, that John Bird has a big house in the south of France and also one in the West Indies, I always say when I hear this argument, did you check this out before you passed it on? Am I really on £300,000 a year, etc.? There are too many people who are in poverty who are not checking out before they pass it on, and you could understand it. But why would you employ somebody from a prominent university in a grammar school or a public school, and they come to the same conclusions? Not the need to check it out before you pass it on. The other thing is I didn't want the school of what you might call the who's that Australian, John Pilger School of Journalism. Do you know about John Pilger School of Journalism? Everybody loves the John Pilger School of Journalism, especially journalists. He was being he was being given a professorship at the same time as I was. I won't carry on with the Australian accent. And he got to give a lecture, and I didn't. This was at the School of Journalism at Lincoln University. And he went on about how we all need to be investigative journalists. Well, I mean, someone's got to do something other than that. Can't just all be investigative journalists. And I wasn't allowed to talk, so I asked a question. He said, hello, John. John. I said, John, why is it that you and investigative journalists are of a particular, what you do is you move on. You're like tourists. You go, look what's happening there. Another part of the world. And I said, you're never interested in answers. You're never interested in the resolution of what we do while we're on earth. All you're really interested in is fear. Now, you've done some great things in the course of your life. Now, you imagine Pilger having to put up with this. I mean, Jesus Christ. And I'm supposed to be on his side. No wonder he wouldn't give me a lift back to London. And I said, you've done some fantastic things. You exposed what was happening in East Timor. You exposed all sorts of things about that place in where they cleared everybody off, Diego Gazares, whatever, in the South Pacific, and built a great big runway for the Americans. Not a particularly good bit of British Empire building. You expose all these things, but what you do is you get people always chasing, and nobody ever interested in solutions. Anyway, John Pilger was really cheesed off with this, and he said, well, John, we always rely on people like you to find the answers. And I said, well, great on you, but the problem is that the press is weighed towards creating the kind of fear and despondency that you peddle. And I said, it's using capitalists. I said, it's bourgeois. It's a product. Fear is a product. You read the Daily Mail, they need 9/11 every day of the year. They love 9/11. They love the fact that some of our big issue vendors are Romanians, and in certain parts of the country they're the majority. They don't want to know why they're here. They don't want to know why they end up selling the big issue. They don't want to understand anything like that. They just want to slag us off because that sells papers. Now, journalism to me should be something different from that. And unfortunately for me, and I'm saying this, that the biggest struggle I've had over 20 years is not with the homeless, but it's with the received wisdom that you get from the middle class. And I'm not knocking the middle class because I'm in it now, posher than you. Yes, I really am. I'm an MBE. I want to be Lord Bird of Fulham Broadway, but they won't have me. I want to sign my name Broadway. Anyway, but you get the same people coming into journalism. And that's why we've got to break it open. And I wrote a damning editorial in the Big Issue and said, as soon as I can, I'm going to get rid of the normal journalists. They didn't want to hear this, of course. But, when the proprietors, they say, oh, John's at it again, I said, I want ex-nurses. I want drug addicts. I want failed doctors. I want firemen. I want retired trade unionists. I want old ladies who have given up working in a charity shop and can be trained up to write. I want people who represent our constituency. I want a business gent who's got a bit of heart and isn't just about making money on or speculating on our insurance policies or pensions. I want the variegation. I don't just want one lot of people. I don't know if you remember, maybe you don't, maybe it's not the case, but whenever you met a doctor in the 50s, he was almost incredibly posh. It was, patrician, always came from the same class, and talked very much like that. They all seemed to have a lisp or something like that. And that was them. So everybody had to be, and now we've got different kind of doctors. We've got Indians, we've got Jews and Jamaicans, and we're mixing it up, and Scottish. Yes, we've got them all mixed up. And we're having a variegation. Nature doesn't like monoculture, and nor should we. So why is it whenever we read the papers, we've either got the people who went to the university but now pretend they've forgotten everything and they write tabloid crap, or you get the other people who say, Cameron's at it again, and Brown is at it again, and Blair's at it again, and Samson, or what his name is. Salmon or Samson? Salmon, is it? Sorry. He's at it again. Everybody, who's got their hands in the pockets of the paper? Which is all right. I mean, I won't say, no. Maybe there are a lot of people, but there's always other things. How difficult is it in life to find out what's happening if all you are looking for is who is the goodie and who is the baddie? The reason I'm interested in the new journalism is because it's not the new journalism that was the school of new journalism that grew out of people like Tom Wolfe in America, the great journalists who brought in a different way of doing the new journalism. And every now and then, people talk about the new journalism. What I'm interested in is the new technology that allows you to create the new journalism, where the man in the white shirt, 3 or 4 rows from the back, and the glasses, hello, can you put your hand up? That gentleman could become a writer. And not only become a writer, he could be expressing opinions that are unique, and the only way to find out is to give him a platform. And one of the most wonderful things today is that we've got more chance of people having platforms who don't come from the same, that same thin trail through the jungle of life that most of them come from. Unfortunately, we also have the X factor, and I don't know if you noticed, but the X factor is one of those manifestations in society which means that in 10 or 20 years' time, the audience is going to be empty and everybody's going to be on the stage. So we do want some readers, or we do want some audience. We can't all be on the stage. But there is a really interesting factor in the creation of what is being called citizen journalism. a breakdown. About 10 years ago, I had to go and there was a young woman who I knew who was very, very ill and was about to die, and I got some money from a book, just to show you what a great geezer I am and how posh I am, and really just deep down very charitable. This young woman who I knew she worked for me, and I found out she was killing herself through taking food and then vomiting it out. And I paid for her to go to a clinic in Canada, which was very cheap and very successful and turned her life around. And I went to see her for a week. And the transformation is wonderful. And I got this money from Penguin to do my autobiography, and I spent it wisely, I have to say. But there, in this little town called Brandon on the American-Canadian border, was a fantastic publication. And it was a photocopied daily newspaper. And I went to the office, I said, how many did you do? They said, about 5,000. Came out every day, and what it had was the world's news and then Brandon's news all mixed up. It was really wonderful, and it was like block by block. And I thought, wow, that's what we're going to be able to do with the new technology. I mean, we never got around to it because we got quite a number of problems. The big issue's been through quite a load of problems over the years, largely because governments, as I said, take people on these half journeys and they take them away from us who want to get them working and earning. And what you do is you put them through the half journey, and therefore they can't sell the big issue because they're on Social Security and all sorts of other problems like that. And they get taken out of the workforce. So we're trying to get people to earn their own money, stand on their own 2 feet. So we have been pretty perilous. We are like this. We've always been like this. And now we're having to reinvent our business. What we're looking at is reinventing the business. We're not ending our relationship with the streets, but we're beginning to put another string to the bow of homeless people. And this is coming to where... Oh, sorry, I nearly went there. I did have a glass of wine at lunchtime. Did you hear about, Tommy Cooper? You like Tommy Cooper? He rushes up and knocks on this guy's door and he says, excuse me, sir. He says, do you believe in the freedom of speech? And the bloke said, yes, of course I do. He said, oh, can I use your phone then? Yeah. That's good. I like that. It's 4 jokes, or 3. Sorry, where was I? Anybody listening? Where was I? Oh, yeah, change it. Thank you. And we're back to where I've always wanted to be, because I'm a radical. But I'm not a left-wing radical or a right-wing reactionary radical. I've lived through so many governments, and they've all screwed up homeless people and the poor. They parked them up in poverty and not got them out. 70% of the British middle class, the British middle class expanded by 70% in the 20th century because people morphed and worked their way and burnt the candle at both ends and got out of poverty. And now what we do is we put them on Social Security, give them a half journey, never given them means to get out. With 0.5% in England, we're not talking about Scotland, 0.5% of people from a Social Security background getting in to university. Isn't that terrible? Or a higher education. Anyway, this gives me a great chance, this new technology, as a person who was once a part of the... Are you enjoying this? Good, because before you go, I told you I was a devout Catholic. I've got a bloke standing with a plate. So you won't get out without... That's the only religious thing I do now is take up collections. I've lost myself again, sorry. Where was I? University. Yeah, university. With only 1/2 of us. Thank you for coming. Give the girl an MBE. You can have mine. 0.5% of people from a Social Security background ending up in our universities. What a crime. What a crime. I don't know the figures for Scotland. Anyway, I used to be a part of the problem. I got out, became posh. I know the difference between Cimabue, who you've never heard of, and Giotto. Not a lot, but I do know. I know Paolo Uccello, great painter. I know all sorts of posh things. But the point is, I was a part of the problem, and I got the chance to become a part of the solution. Isn't that wonderful? So what I did was I looked down into the abyss of people who were in poverty. And I said, how can I get those out and get them up here with me? How can I get them in the middle class? All right then, there's a friend of mine here who says, it's not so great. She says, it's not so great being in the middle class, or something like that. And she's probably right, but, you know, I think people should be there. The best place not to like being in the middle class is when you're in it, and then you can leave it. You can become a farm labourer or, you know, go to India and work in a village. And I've got all these people, poor people, and there's nobody giving them exit strategies. So I get people work ready. I get people ready for work, get them job ready, under starters orders, sort them out, clean them up, get them talking to the public well, hit their drink and drug problems, spend a lot of money and a lot of time on getting them job ready, and then where's the job? Washing vans for Comet Warehouse. And if you've actually been a homeless person selling the big issue, you've learned enormous skills. You've learned marketing. You've learned ambassadorial skills. You've learned, if you've done it the right way, some of them are not, and I'm sure everyone's met somebody who was no great advertisement for the big issue. But most of them have learnt certain skills and abilities, and those skills and abilities are transferable skills, but no one's offering them the transferable job. Do you get what I mean? What does this say here? Does that say that? It looks nicer like that. I think I'll come up here and learn Gaelic. My mother's first language was Gaelic, by the way. But she only left me with Dún and Doris, Caché Mahara, which is shut the door, if you please. There was no emphasis on the please. See that, she's come from the richest language in the world, and she leaves me a line or two, which I keep using and doesn't get me anywhere, especially when you're talking to the Taoiseach. Anyway, so there are these people. How can I get them out? And then, whoa, hallelujah. What about if I got those homeless people who are selling the paper? What about if I got them to become correspondents of a new digital publication? What if I got those people and I got long-term unemployed people or unemployed people who want to volunteer and morph their way back into work through voluntarism, which is one of the best ways of doing it. I mean, make sure you don't get taken a fool of. I did a book a few years ago called Benefit Exit Handbook. 90% of the people got back into work through voluntarism. 70% of them were women who were considered over the top but got back in. Anyway, what about if I get homeless people, long-term unemployed people? What if I get them to become correspondents to a new digital magazine, which is a magazine, an app, a page-turner, a wonderful big new way of supplying information to the people? What if I got befrienders, who were people who might do it part-time or might do it as a way back into the workforce, and train them up? And what if I put those two people together to go out and news hunt so that the homeless person was not being set up to fail? And what if that homeless person couldn't read or write? What if I gave them one of these smartphones and they could be interviewed, and then I could embed that in my new digital magazine? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could if I could get homeless people to, if we needed to do a report, they would report to the befriender, who then wrote their story up for them and sent it in. The digital divide, the literacy divide would disappear if they couldn't use the system, and if they could use the system, we'd train them. What if I lined up libraries, coffee shops? What if I lined up, what do they call those? Video shop? No, digital, cafes. Digital cafe? Internet cafes. What if I got all these, what if I got a lot of people involved in the redemption or the renaissance of the lives of these people? Wow. But then what would the magazine be about? So I spent, how are we doing for time, by the way? Because I have no idea. Don't say you're doing all right. 5 minutes, but we've got to have some questions and answers.
Yeah. Leave time for questions.
Oh, yes, good. And, yeah, all right. He's a lovely guy. He says that he wants me to be the principal. Didn't you? Didn't you offer that? He said you can be anything you want. Oh, yes. Could you see that lovely young lady up there? She's going to come. Thank you very much. Just up there. There she is. Yes, her mother, 8 years ago, I was separated from my second wife, and her mother, after 9 days, volunteered to marry me. She said, I'm going to marry you, Johnny Bird. I said, well, you're going to have to bury me, because she was slightly younger than me. And I've got 2 beautiful children. The only thing I won't do for my wife is pay for those cornea operations. I think it's better. She's left as she is now. Are you that good looking? Anyway. No, but what do you do? What do you do? What subject do you do? What, another big issue online? So what do you do? What? Why would you have all these people reporting to you? Not just in the UK, not just in Scotland, but all over the world. Where the big issue is help start street papers and work with homeless people. What are you going to do? And then, lo and behold, in the middle of the night, which is when I do most of my writing, it suddenly occurred to me. Back to the Mr. Pilger thing. Oh, look at that, look what they're up to. Look. And it occurred to me, of course, the world is obsessed with failure and death and murder, with what's gone wrong and who's got whose hand in whose pocket. But why do I go to the Highlands of Scotland? Why do I go to Ness Soap, for instance, and meet people who wouldn't get a job normally because they've got physical or mental disabilities, but look at them and almost cry because I know they've been given a purpose and an opportunity of making money? An answer, a social answer, a solution. I know what. I'll start a magazine online, a page turner, and I will build an enormous website, and all it'll do is gobble up answers all over the world. From Loch Ness to wherever, Tokyo. What about that? What about sending the world a message that actually there are answers, and if you converge them and congregate them and aggregate them, you can bring about an enormous social change. And you get your homeless vendors, ex-vendors, long-term unemployed, and you train them as the new journalists. They don't have to be from need. It can be all sorts of people. I'm up here talking to a few prospective journalists. Wouldn't it be wonderful if people concentrated in this magazine? All right then, you want the failures, you want who's got whose hands in his pockets. There's plenty more. crime and despondency costs money to write about, and we've got the Mail and we've got all the others to do that. I wrote a book about poverty called The Necessity of Poverty, which I was about to publish. I was supposed to publish it this weekend. And then a leading London Sunday newspaper, who shall be nameless, wanted to read the script. It's only 20,000 words. And I sent it to them. And then the bloke came back to me and said, John, this is really great. It's absolutely marvellous. He said, you've really analysed how we all need poverty, and if we're going to make poverty history, we need to understand that it's actually a part of our everyday life. Now, what do you want to, can you just tell me who's getting it wrong? I said, well, everybody's kind of getting it wrong a bit, He said, but can you say something about Amnesty International or Christian Aid or something? I said, no. I said, I'm not slagging anybody off. He said, well, if you don't slag somebody off, I'm sorry, I can't run your story. And I swear on my life, and I'm, known for being, I'm known as Honest John Bird, or is it dishonest? I can remember. It's one or the other. But the thing was, I was absolutely mortified. I'd spent months and months and months analysing poverty and how we need to get out of poverty, and coming up with about 15 ways of getting out of poverty. And all this major London newspaper, Sunday, millions of copies, didn't really want to hear the story. What they wanted to hear was, who are you going to upset? Who are you going to have a go at Amnesty? Oh, treasured group. No one has a go at Amnesty. Stephen Fry and Amnesty, they're consanguineous. That's the other thing, when you've been banged up for a long time, someone sends you a thesaurus, you get the words. Or Christian Aid, or Action Aid, or all these other people. And why did I don't want to have a go at those, because this isn't personal. This is about how you get people out. So there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in just keeping us, not just in the dark, but in well-informed dark. The worst kind of dark. It is a variation, I'm sorry to say, on the glass is always half empty in the tabloid world. And when I came up here, I went to a charity shop, and I'm only talking about, and I go all over the place and see all sorts of people. I went to a charity shop where they took clothes and they took people who wouldn't get a job, and they got them processing the clothes and earning money and starting a little printing outfit and all sorts of things like that. I forget the name. I was mortified at the fact that I didn't know about this. I was upset that I was coming here and I hadn't done my homework. Who was I going to meet? Went to Wet Nest Soap, went to another organisation that works with people who will once again never get a job, and who are doing all sorts of work for some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in Britain, Johnson & Johnson, just down the road here, and all working with people with, as they call, special needs. I don't know if that fits the category. Why don't we oxygenate those? Why don't we say this is where the religious, the irreligious, the political left, the political right, the political centre can meet? Because we all want to know. And what if you get some place like Nest Soap, for instance, and you can get them and you can pick them up with other people so that they can do a better job, so that they can replicate this. I was in Abergavenny just after I was in Scotland last year, doing some work with the Sun, of all people. But in a nice sort of way, interestingly, about how you get people out of poverty. I went to Abergavenny. Now, Abergavenny is about the size of Inverness, I was told. I don't know if it's true. There was no Nest Soaps. There was nothing there. No social enterprises, no people running charities that got people into work. And I said to a guy there, I said, "What you ought to look at Inverness. You could bring in a soap company and all that." Anyway, So John Pilger, we all need our John Pilgers, otherwise we wouldn't know, would we? We do need them. But, you know, you don't need a lot of salt in your meal. And you don't need people say, ice cream's not bad for you. It is if you have a ton of it. You know, nothing is bad for you. But you imagine a world where the media is turned into a way of battering you down and keeping you indoors and watching Neighbours, or no, not Neighbours, that's gone. What's that other one? You see, I don't watch television. I don't watch television. I don't read the newspapers. I like to keep myself remarkably uninformed. And I don't watch television. Though I'm on Question Time in a few weeks' time, so you better watch out and watch that. They don't know where to put me. I'll have to sit on probably Mr. Dimmock's lap. Or, no, not Dimmock. What's his name? Grimmon's lap? Or whatever his name. What's his name? Yeah. Who? Dimbleby's lap. I'll have to sit on Dimbleby's lap. I hope he's a nice guy. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's my future. I absolutely love the ABC Tales, which is launching on the 21st of May. It's going to be a soft launch. By that, I mean we're going to have 3 issues, which are pre-launch issues. So we learn on the job, we find out what's happening. I want the public to use it. I want somebody who's got a literacy problem being able to put in touch with a literacy program that would fit with them. I want some child who needs help because they're having problems with their family and there being an answer somewhere else for them to come together. I want people to have a cognitive democracy, so that they do know what's going on in the world and not just relying on what they're told. And Big Issue Answers is really the culmination of everything I've wanted to do. Give the people who have been a part of the problem the chance of being a part of the solution. Involving the public in this germination and creation. Allowing the guy with the glasses and the white shirt the opportunity to maybe be a correspondent as well and put in or maybe even help one of the people who we train up to be a journalist or a correspondent. I'd like to call them correspondents because journalism it's got a bit of a bad name. Anyway, thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much, John. John's kindly agreed to take questions, so do we have questions? And please remember to use the mics so that the folks who are watching this from Perth will hear the questions. So do we have a question? Put your hand up if you want a mic. Yep.
Oh, that's another thing. I don't give my kids Coca-Cola. 70% of our school children are dehydrated. And that's not just, people going to state schools, it's public schools, everything. Everybody now doesn't, I drink all the water I can.
Right, do we have a question? Right, over there on the top.
John, you talk quite movingly of the half journey, and I think many of us could probably relate to that. Is it partly because, or is it driven by indeterminate funding and sometimes insecure funding that organisations and charities often have to work under?
Can they hear me? Yes, they can. Yeah, you're right. That's probably one of the biggest considerations. People don't, when people said to me, why did you start the Big Issue? I said, because I wanted a business solution to a social problem. And the reason I chose a business is because if you make the money, you can invest. And we've invested all over the world. And if we'd been a charity, we would never have been allowed to do that. Charities are never given enough money. Don't blame the charities. All right, then there's some that are, telling porcupines, but most charities are well-intentioned. They just don't get the regular money. They don't get the investment. St Mungo's, for instance, who I've worked with in London and I've known for 30, 40 years, even before the big issue, the Simon community, another one, just don't get the money. They get half the money that is needed. I did for the 15th anniversary of the big issue, I did a manifesto called A Rolls-Royce Service for the Homeless, Please. And it was all based on the life of a young London Irish guy who I grew up with. Well, I grew up with his father, and I knew him. So between the ages of 22 and 42, he was never out of prison. He was a drinker, drug, smashed up places, did all sorts of terrible things and died at 42. Everybody having spent millions on him. Millions. The problem was he could not have gone to a really Rolls-Royce service homeless organisation that would have given him a good detox, a good rehab, a good therapeutic community, not just an hour or two of counselling, but the whole thing. They could have dismantled him and put him together. In the same way as the Priory does. The Priory, it takes in our movie stars and all that stuff. I've had people who I know and members of my own family have been through that. And they really do, they do about 70 to 80%. Now, if we could invest £100,000 in that young guy, Liam, he would be alive with us now, but not only that, it's a lot cheaper. And you don't, because government departments are silos, as we know, they don't realise that if you put money into St Mungo's or into the Cyrenians or into any of those other organisations that do our work for us, because they're picking up the people who have fallen through the cracks, they just don't get the money. And that is one of the major things. Also, unfortunately, it's very, very difficult if you're running a charity to tell the truth, because you can't say, I tried this and it didn't work. That's why I used to print, when I was in the print, I specialised in charitable annual reports, and I think I'm the person who came up with the idea of always put a child with a smiling face on a swing with everybody smiling, because that's the image that the public want, and you can't tell them that actually this didn't work. And as you know, one always learns more from one's scars than one does from, why is it when a government wins an election, they never analyse why they won it? They only analyse it when it went wrong. So charities have to be given the space, and they don't. We are still controlled by the charity commissioners. It's different up here, but we're still controlled by a Victorian methodology around charities. Charities' first concern, whatever they say, is to guarantee longevity. That means make sure you've got the money to do the work. Therefore you get some very big charities who put all their money back. There's £400 billion in charities. And a lot of that is tied up in long-term living off the interest rather than solving the problem. We live in the Victorian world. We need to modernise charities and make them feisty, hard-working, hard-hitting organisations. And we need to guarantee their funds. Give them the space. Let's be like the Japanese. They invest for 20 years. We invest for 6 months.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any further questions?
There's a gentleman there.
Yep. This lady. Okay. You go.
Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, just thanks, John, for a tour de force. I'd really like to hear a bit more about the nuts and bolts of this new web venture that you're doing. Endlessly fascinated by and a bit perplexed by the impact of social media and the amazing things that are going on. There's an awful lot of, the signal-to-noise ratio is not always good, but the actual conversations and communications that are taking place are extraordinary when you dig down into them. And I'm just really wondering, do you know what this new venture is going to look like in 6 months or a year's time? Is it a leap of faith, or do you have a model in your head of what the success is going to be? And if so, what is that?
Well, when I was standing for the Mayor of London at one stage, as a Conservative, I had an agreement with them that I didn't have to join the Conservative Party. And they agreed to that until one member said, oh no, and that's how Boris Johnson got his job. I was Cameron and they all wanted me, but Boris got his job, and otherwise I would have been basking and I wouldn't have been talking to you today. When that happened, my office opened a Twitter account and a Facebook account, and they said, John, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, I'm not going to tell you. It's not that I was doing anything snide or anything. I just didn't want to. I said, I don't. The problem is, I've always avoided social media because it's such a corrupting force in society. And as you know, cars and travel can be corrupted, but they can also be a force for good. And what I see the Big Issue Answers turning into is the social media. I see it using the Twitter, the Facebook, the mobile phone in a totally different way. That means with not just the form, but also the content. I have no idea where it's going to go because it might not go very far at all. But all the portents are very good. I was with a woman who runs a very, very large charity and has an enormous amount of money to spend. I'm not after her money. She supports 800 largely children's charities in the UK. And she said she'd love to shine a light on most of them. Some of them she'd like the light turned off. But that's the problem when you have such a big spread. She says she knows what she's talking about. This has got to be a website. It's got to use Twitter. It's got to use Facebook. She says, if you give people a new purpose for it, then you'll find people will convert to it who would never use it in other ways. I want you, who's probably, I'm not judging you by the look of your book or the cover, but if you've never tweeted, you may want to tweet this. You may want to tweet this and say, I have just discovered an enormously powerful individual who's running a program, and I think you should get hold of him. In the first issue of Big Issue Answers, I'll just take you through some of the things. I went to something called Living Sober. Living Sober is in Tyne and Wear, which is just below Newcastle. And there's a house of 25 men based on what's called the Oxford program, which is an American rehab and detox and, for alcoholics. You've got 25 men who on average were costing over £1 million a year when they were heavy drinkers to the National Health Service and also prison service and all sorts of things like that. It costs £125,000 a year to run these people. They can never quite get the money. So we're going to promote them, and at the end of all of our articles, we've got this thing called report and return. This isn't ephemeral. You report a story and you check the story, how it's changed over 6 months, 9 months, a year. And if it doesn't work, you look at why it doesn't work and you help people and all that stuff. We're going to be using Twitter. They've started to use Twitter. They've started to use Facebook, largely because we've encouraged them to do that. And out of that, they've started to get some funding in. At the end of our article, it will be saying, Living Sober. What do they want? Well, they want new premises, they want volunteers, and they want money. So we'll be fundraising for them. I hope this will become the most useful thing. When I started the Big Issue, I started it to get to decriminalise the homeless. Not all of them were criminal, but there was enough of them who, because they had problems, they were causing grief in feeding that problems. I was with a great Scottish guy last night, Kevin Dooley, who's spent 8 years of them in Peterhead for a few attempted murders. Kevin Dooley got out of the sticky stuff, is now going into prisons and teaching people, and once a part of the problem, he's now a part of the solution. And he's done all this, and he needs to be He needs the light shone on him so that other people can see what he's doing. So there's all these wonderful opportunities. But, you know, hopefully, because I started the big issue in a very, very narrow sort of way, we can now move it on to be more inclusive to all of us. We're still selling the paper on the streets as long as the streets will have us. But I really want to put another string to the bow of people in need, in crisis, so that they don't have to sell in the streets, but they have this opportunity of getting, dare I say, a good middle-class job.
I think that my question's just been answered really there in that last one, so that's fine. I was just thinking about how you get attention with so much noise.
You need a mic, otherwise you don't get recorded.
I think my question's already been answered in the last one, so just about how to get something new noticed when there's so much noise going on in the digital world.
There is a lot of noise. We're having to brown nose a few people, the usual. You have to brown nose the press, and we have to get some personalities in. But more than anything, I think if you've got the engagement of these organisations, I mean, one of the other things is that we will be able to sell. There's a part of it which is called quarter two, which I love this idea. That means you want to buy greetings cards online. If you come through us, 25% of the money will go, 25%, not wait until we've made a profit, but 25% will then go to the charity or the social initiative or the organisation that you support. So if you have 1,000 people who use Nest soap and they all use it, we're doing this with honey, Manuka honey, which is very, very expensive, but it's very, very good for you. We're doing it with underwear of all things. Sorry about that. But there's a lot of people out there who are making underwear and they can't sell it in the big shops, so they want to sell it online. 25% goes. Chocolate, we're doing it. We're doing it. There's about a dozen things. And we want to be able to sell soap for Ness. We want to be able to sell, there's a project in Ullapool making candles, which I've just been told about. I want to sell their candles for them. I want them to become self-sustaining. And I want the public to be involved in that. And I want the public to make savings through using charities and using social organisations, all these sorts of things. So one of the big charities we're talking to is a London hospital that has 250,000 people on their, database. And if they say, well, come through Big Issue Answers, then they're going to make, thousands of pounds a year that they're not making at the moment.
Yes, Isabel. Up here.
Thanks very much. John, what is your vision for the big issue? It's my sense that the nature of the vendor has changed over time. The nature of the sales experience has also changed. So our relationship as customers of the big issue seems to be with a different salesman. So yeah. I guess, I'm sure you talked earlier about how people are very quick to pass on criticism, and sometimes you hear people making a fortune from the big issue and all sorts of cynical stories. What is your personal vision for the magazine?
Well, irrespective of my personal vision, when we first started 21 years ago almost, the streets of London and other cities, including Glasgow, were full of homeless people sleeping rough. They were brought indoors, they were moved on, and they were shackled, in my opinion, in social security, that half journey that I talked about. So what's really happened is this process of erosion, that our core base of salespeople has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because more and more people are moving straight into the social security, social housing programs, which great on them. what I would love to do is then, which I've tried to negotiate with the government, the Scottish government is much better at it than the London government, who are looking at the idea, why don't we still work with them? Why don't we still give them the social support? Why don't we still develop some of the programs so that it doesn't matter where they're from if they're ex-homeless? But it's proving a bit difficult. What happened about 10 years ago, I think it was about 10 years ago, we suddenly realized that there were more and more people, Roma people coming from Romania, and they were coming to us. And before they came, a whole group of Roma organizations came to us and said, look, they're changing the law and they're going to allow half citizens in. Now, I don't know what a half citizen looks like, but I do know that a half citizen is you come in, there's certain things you can do, certain things you can't do. You can't work. You have to be self-funded and all sorts of stuff. Now, they let into this country, into the United Kingdom, an enormous amount of people in the region of about 350,000 who are people who have come, a sizable amount of them destitute. Now, I'm not allowed to say this, but I do say it. When I was in the prison system, I was at a particular institution where 30% of the people in that prison were from a London Irish background, and yet we only represented 1% of the population. Why was that? Because we were one of the new immigrations. And immigration does throw up crime, because if you don't absorb the people, then some of them are going to resort to crime. And this has always happened. That is why when we started the big issue, we always wanted to absorb people and give them an alternative to doing wrong. The people who were doing that, we gave them the chance of not mugging an old lady, but buying the big issue, selling the big issue, so it gave them a legitimate means of getting out of their face, in the way that most working people of the middle classes, of the working classes, they don't have to mug an old lady to go out and baby themselves stupid on a Saturday night. And we wanted to give the poor the same opportunities. What's happened with the Roma is that they've had such a bad press, and they really have had a bad press, that it's very, very difficult for people like me who say, look, I know that when a group of teachers from Romford come to me and say, if you don't let these people sell the paper, they will send their children out, and their children will earn their wages or earn the money by whatever means. In January, there was a big hue and cry in the Mail and other places because a big issue vendor in a Roma woman, big issue vendor in Bristol, was given a top-up of her benefits. She was on about 25,000, she was given another 2,000, and she was selling the big issue. Now, my attitude was I didn't start the big issue in order to top people's benefits up. But that's one argument. But the real thing was that the very day that happened, my wife got her phone stolen by a group of Romas, and it does happen. But no one allows you to state things. No one allows you to say, look, there is a tendency. When a Roma representative comes to me and says, look, thank you for starting this Roma project down in Ilford, but nail everything down and lock every door. And I can't even talk about this. So I'm shackled. I know, of course, I'm saying it now, and who knows, it may be on YouTube. But the point is, it's all going to change anyway, because in the next 18 months, people's status is changing, because Tony Blair arranged this so many years ago, and in at the end of 2013, 2014, they will have full rights, and then we won't see them. They'll move on. And we will get another group of people who are in difficulties. At the moment, we are getting people who don't want to go on Social Security, who want to come and work selling the big issue, and they want to sell the big issue because they want to keep some kind of integrity because they've been in work for a while. So we're actually the big issue changing. I think the real problem with the big issue, and the Scottish big issue has suffered this, is that we have not moved with the times. Because what we should be doing is more and more. When I told you about Brandon in Canada, where it gets more and more local news, that's the way we should have gone. The problem with that is it costs money. And I assure you that as the chief executive of the big issue, it's never made any big bucks. I met a woman the other night who's got £1 million for a publishing project. No one's ever given us £1 million. This has come from government and all sorts of things, and I think. And what she's planning on doing, I could do for 100,000, I assure you. So you meet that there's the money out there. It just doesn't come our way. We get money from the Scottish government because we promote some of their projects in the big issue. But that's the only money, but the Welsh big issue as well. But we're largely run as a commercial business. But it will change, and big issue answers will change the big issue. What I want more than anything is to end that half journey, because it also occurs in our organisation. I assure you, if you can take people that far, and if you can't take them any further, then you have to be as belligerent and argumentative, which I try to be, about saying, let's complete the journey. Let's do what you did with your children. You saw them through the journey. And if you stopped halfway, or they fell off the rails, you do your utmost to get them up. I've never answered a question shortly in the whole of my life.
More questions or comments?
I think there was a lady over there, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's
You
somebody
changed
here.
your mind, did you?
Right, you go, and then we've somebody here.
I think my question was
Any more
answered.
water, please? Sorry.
Yeah, no.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there is.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there
yes. I didn't mean kind of pour it out of me. I've done that myself. You don't have to be a principal to pour the water out, do you?
I'm clearer. I think I'm clearer now after your last answer to your question. I wondered if you were planning to set up a different kind of big issue, but I gather now that you're not.
Well, I tell you the area that I want to work in is because I went through it myself, which is abuse, people who abuse their children. I want to work in that area because when you take a survey of the homeless selling the big issue and you find out that 70% of them have been in local authority care, and that is real bad news. I wasn't in local authority care, I was taken in by the church. But when you've got abused children, I'm a 66-year-old man. I'm an ex-abused child. I will never get it out of my body. And it will always work against you. And that's where we need to get there, reconstructing our families, whether that is a one-parent family or whatever. That's where I think the big issue is. And if I was going to be doing a big issue exclusively for my own concerns, I'd be looking at what we do to our children. I joked about Coca-Cola. I was in Kibera, the largest shanty town in Africa. I could not believe it. I was there to get an award from the president, from the UN, and it was enormous. Over 100,000 people sitting on a hill in the hot sun watching us. And then the president left with his 500 troops and we were left. And it was a very dangerous place to be, Kibera. And a group of Muslim women came up to me and said, come on, we want to show you something. And they took me down right into the heart of Kibera. And they took me to a project which was building houses in the outer breeze blocks. And it was involving the mothers and all sorts of things like that. Now, all right, this was a religious group that wasn't pushing the religion. They were a social Muslim group. And I looked at the children, I could not believe it. Bright-eyed, clean teeth, deferential towards their adults, their old, really integrated. And I said to the mothers, I said, how do you manage to produce such healthy-looking children in the middle of this? And they said, we never put anything in their mouths which is bad for them, for two reasons. One is we can't afford it, and two, because it's bad for them. And I said to them, I'm living on the largest housing estate in South London. I wish I could get some African mothers and take them to the housing estate that I lived on. And that's, to me, the greatest irony is that the poorest of people have the biggest of problems because they now find it very difficult to bring up their children in this world of capitalism and consumerism. It's really, really difficult. It's more difficult being a child now than when I was a boy. What we lacked was food, and we lacked all forms of nourishment, all sorts of encouragement. We lacked parents. I mean, my parents should never had 7 children. I mean, I don't think I would have given them one, because they weren't up to it.
Yes, but you must be of an age with me.
Sorry?
You're about the same age as I am, and we weren't particularly well off, but, you know, you can't say that all parents at that time were bad parents.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was, when I was a kid, I was trying to make a comparison. What actually happened to me when I was a kid was very, very bad. But what I'm saying today, I think it's even more difficult to bring up children. I was making a comparison how hard it was for children in slummy London, and also in Glasgow, because we had family in Glasgow, living in the Gorbals, because our family went 2 ways. Both of them, nutty as a fruitcake. But the point is, however difficult it was to bring up children then, it's much more difficult to bring up children in a world of consumerism and, commodification and all that. I think it's very, very difficult today to bring up children. There's too many temptations, That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not saying, my father-in-law, my first father-in-law, was a Scotsman, a lovely guy, worked for the National Commercial Bank, which became a part of Bank of Scotland. He was, 20 years older than me. He brought up children, and his brothers and sisters brought up, and him. You would never believe it, a totally and utterly different class, but they were working class, hard-working Scots people. But we didn't have any of that. We were blow-ins, if you see what I mean. Anyway, sorry. No one's walked out yet. Tell you another joke?
No. You've spoken a lot about taking people on the half journey and leaving them there, and you've talked about the failure of governments of all colours, taking people halfway. What do you see as the role of government, public agencies, universities, public bodies with money in helping people to complete the journey?
Well, first of all, we have to reform the social security system. That's the biggest thing that any government could do, in my opinion. And I've given this advice to everyone from here to China. That if you take poor people and you say to them, I'm now putting you somewhere where your housing and your daily needs are ineffectively and inefficiently delivered, and I'm going to leave you there forever and not take you anywhere else, I think that is a crime. It's a crime against that person, and it's a crime against the welfare state, which was invented to be a springboard, not a safety net that was made out of concrete. When Nide Bevan and all his mob when Keir Hardie founded the Labour Party, they didn't found the Labour Party and the welfare state in order for it to park people up in long-term unemployment. Margaret Thatcher, not the most popular person, what she did was when she was asked by what was going to happen with the nearly 1 million people who were going to be laid off in the 80s because of closing down the lame duck industries, the shipbuilding industry, the heavy steel industry, the coal mining industry, and what was the other? I forget, there's the other industry. Nearly 850,000 people were laid off, all in the space of a few years. And when Lord Willie Whitelaw says, what are we going to do with these people? It is reported in Lord Willie Whitelaw's diaries that she said, let them have benefit. And that totally changed the benefit system. When I was a young man trying to get benefit, I could only get 3 weeks. I had to change my name about 15 times. I was, I got lost. It was difficult. Never try and get benefit in Edinburgh, by the way. Or not in there. So the point is, it was a last-ditch stand. The social security system was for the disabled, the mentally and physically ill, the old, and deserted mothers and all that stuff. And it made the system that it is now. The reform of the social security system means that we have to get value for money, and they have to get value for money. The problem is it does not work that way. When you go into prisons, as I do, and I'm in a prison in a couple of weeks' time, and 85% of the people you meet are from a social security background, then something is going wrong. And in my opinion, we wanted to avoid the 1930s. Nobody should be starving and all that. And what we did, and Beveridge warned against it, don't destroy people's personal initiative and personal responsibility. I can only compare this, and now I'm a historian because I've got time to read posh books, and I get review copies, which is good. And I've read a lot about the French Revolution and the Ancien regime. There was an aristocracy then that lived on unearned income. And there's only one group that it reminds me of, and that's people now living on social security, living on unearned income, which destroys them. It destroyed the Ancien regime and it destroys the poor. And we should love the poor and not park them up. We shouldn't treat them in this half journey. So the first thing I would do is reform the social security system. And that means tough love. That means if you're getting social security, you have to put back. Now, on the housing estate I worked on, I worked with a whole group of people who got the long-term unemployed youths working with old people. And it worked fantastically. And do you know what? It was closed down. You know why? Because the local social security office said these people were no longer available for labour, for work. They were volunteering. They had to sign a particular form, and a lot of them said. And we were getting people who had problems back, rebuilding their lives, and it was terrible to see it. It really was terrible to see this situation. We should believe in the poor so that the poor can get out of poverty. There's only one cure for poverty: get out of it. And if we do nothing else, let's reform our social security system so it becomes a secure system. The other thing about social security system is that they never tell you to deliver £1 to a person in need, it costs 5. So all the money that we spend is not actually getting into the hands of the people in need. It's spent on the bureaucracy that goes into there. £1. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Why would you spend £6 and at the end of it, you can't get that person can't come to you and say, I'll tell you what, I want to study this. I want to become an apprentice. I want to become a football trainer or whatever, something like that. And we've had number of people like that. It doesn't work. I've told Cameron this, I've told them all. Anyway, so.
I think we've time for one more question or one more comment, if there is anybody who wants to. Yes, at the very back, in the middle.
See, they're all running out now, look at them. They've had their money's worth. Sorry. Good night. So you're on question time.
I just wanted to ask quickly about, you said you wanted to take the African mothers over to the housing estate. And
Sorry?
The African mothers over to the housing estate.
Yeah, sorry.
And I was just wanting to ask your opinion on how you get people, obviously you're not going to do that, or if you are, good for you, but how do you get people to engage with their situation? And the likes of the long-term unemployed young people who started working with the older people, how do you engage them? How do you get them to that point?
Well, that is so interesting. When I did this book called The Benefit Exit Handbook, what was really interesting, and it's the same with homeless people. I'll give you an example. There was a guy, he was a Scottish guy, and I'm not picking on them, who was the most belligerent vendor I ever had. He was always pushing his way to the front of the crowd. He also happened to be about 6'4", and he could get away with it, you know. Those big Scotsmen who normally end up as Glasgow policemen, you know. And he was enormous. And he pushed people out of the way and all that. And I got really cheesed off with this, and I said, the next time you do this, you're going to be thrown out, which would have taken about 18 of us. And then I said to him, you know, there's a guy outside sitting there defecating in his underpants because he's drunk. He's like sick everywhere. I said, why don't you go and help that person who's got more problems than you, because that person's going to get arrested because he's sitting on Starbucks door or whatever. And he would have been. They'd have lifted him and taken him off, and he'd have been arrested, and he would have been drunk, and, you know, who knows, and somebody might have got hurt, and it probably would have been him. 3 or 4 days later, I was working into the office, and this guy, I think he's Doogie. He come up and he says, John, he said, I got that guy a bullet. He was an ex-soldier. And I said, what do you mean, a billet? Who? And he said, that bloke. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got him sorted out. He's down with me. And he was living on a boat down near Shadwell. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I helped him. And I said, God. I said, you know what? You're not coming in to tell me that we're not doing enough for you. You're talking about this guy. I said, you better come and work for us. And he worked with us for about 3 or 4 years. It's phenomenal. If you really want to change people, get them helping other people. I swear on my life, I've done it. I've seen it happen in the prison service. I've seen it happen on housing estates. I've seen it happen in with homeless organisations. I've seen it happen. If you give people the dignity of believing in them, that they can help another person, the world is their oyster. I'm not joking. And that's the only way I've ever managed to do it. When I was in a place called Feltham Young Offenders, recently, I'm a part of the alumni, so I go back there sometimes. I like going in because I can say I'm going now, and you know they let me out, and it's lovely. Don't have to climb any walls. But what was interesting, I went in and I spoke to some of the young guys there, young, 17 or 18. Really, many of them, all that, and I talked to them. I did a class with them on bullying, and I said, how many of you really hard guys? I used a few expletives, effing hard guys. How many of you effing hard guys are looking out for the small guy? How many are you looking out for the weak amongst you? How many? And we had this really interesting session that went on for quite a considerable period of time. And I got a letter from one of the guys, and he said it influenced some people. And it was about confronting people. Bully. I am one of those persons who used to confront bullies, so I've got a few broken noses in me. But the point is, a bully is often a person who's been bullied and all sorts of things like that. And once you can kind of engage with them and give them some dignity and match them to look after other people. And a place I was in, a reformatory, they always took one of the new boys and one of the big boys who would probably bully, and they made them their guardian angel. And it worked on most occasions. I mean, sometimes it didn't work. But it's about the idea of giving dignity back to poor people and saying, we want you to be responsible for the well-being of this other person and help them so that they can help somebody else. And Dougie was one of the best examples of that. And the Benefit Exit Handbook was one of those occasions when I met people who had, you know, a woman of 55, beaten and abused by 3 or 4 boyfriends and husbands, many children, all by different people, living on a housing estate in South London. Everybody writ her off. And she met a mother in a lift who was crying because she couldn't get some stuff for the baby, so she got involved. And the next thing you know, she's working at a young mother's clinic. The next thing, she's got a job and she's moving on. And when I had a talk at one of my events, I'm not joking, she spoke for 15 minutes. She cried for 15 minutes. And I said to her after, what are you crying about? She says, I just love what I've done. And this was a woman who everybody had written off. She was a statistic. And I'm saying I've never met anybody who didn't have an increase in dignity if you treat them with dignity. And you don't treat them as a you know, just, you're not up to it. But, you know, that's only I'm talking personal there. I'm sure you can give them a load of drugs and, no, I'm joking. You can buy them off, but no. Cooking classes. Let's get people cooking again. That's one of the big things that we're trying to do. We work with people like Jamie Oliver. We did it even before Jamie Oliver. And if you can get people cooking, communally buying, there's all sorts of wonderful things. Lots of middle-class groups do that. I think we should extend it to people who need help.
Okay. I think that you'll all agree with me that we've had an amazing talk and dialogue from John Bird tonight. I think, John, you've delivered your promise. It was powerful. There was some simple messages. And I think the challenge probably for us is how we go away from here and do something different. And I really think that we owe you a huge debt of gratitude, John, for coming and speaking to us like this tonight. And I want you all to express your appreciation to John for doing this.